Two people live in this house. Two people feed this dog, walk this dog, say goodnight to this dog. And every single day, when the front door opens, the dog runs past one of them like they're furniture. If you've ever felt that the quiet sting of being the other person in your own dog's life, you've probably heard the going theory. Dogs just love one person more. It's a preference, like a favorite flavor. Nothing to be done about it. Here's what the actual research says instead. Your dog's favorite person isn't a feeling it has. It's closer to an outcome, the result of a selection process that started weeks before you even knew this dog, runs on a hormone receptor that's different in every single animal, and locks in a role that, once filled, genuinely cannot be filled by anyone else. In the next few minutes, I'm going to show you the 4 forces that actually decide who gets picked, and I'm going to show you why picked doesn't mean what you think it means. This is PetMindLabs. Let's stop guessing and start seeing. Let's start with the assumption everyone makes, because it's not crazy, it's just incomplete. My dog loves Sarah more than me sounds like a verdict about affection. Like there's a hidden scoreboard, and you lost. But watch what actually happens when researchers try to measure who does the dog prefer in a controlled way, instead of just watching who gets tackled at the door. What they find isn't one sliding scale of love with a winner and a loser. What they find is a bundle of separate systems, timing, role, chemistry, scent, that each get assigned somewhat independently, and then stack on top of each other, until one person ends up holding most of the roles at once. That person looks, from the outside, like the favorite, but nobody sat down and loved harder. Something got assembled. Think about it like this. Nobody asks why a company has one CEO instead of 2 people sharing the love of running it equally. Roles concentrate. Somebody ends up making the calls, somebody ends up signing off, somebody ends up being the one people go to first when something breaks. A household with a dog in it works a little like that, except the roles are things like who showed up during the window that mattered, who this animal now treats as irreplaceable in a crisis, and whose particular biology reacts to this particular dog. None of those are about how much anyone loves the dog. All of them are measurable. And by the end of this video, you're going to be able to look at your own house and see exactly which levers got pulled and which ones are still yours to pull. This matters more than it sounds like it should. Because my dog loves someone else more is one of those small hurts people rarely say out loud. It shows up as a joke at dinner. Guess who's not the favorite? But underneath the joke, there's usually a real, quiet question. Did I do something wrong? Am I just less lovable to this animal than the other person in my own house? Almost nobody answers that question with research. They answer it with a guess, and the guess is almost always harsher than the truth. So before we get into the mechanics, it's worth saying plainly, by the end of this video, the honest answer is going to be a lot kinder than the guess most people are currently sitting with. And here's why this is worth 20 minutes of your time instead of a 10-second answer. Almost every video and every article on this topic gives you a single cause explanation. Dogs bond with whoever feeds them, or dogs love whoever spends the most time with them, or, worst of all, dogs just have a favorite. Deal with it. Each of those is true some of the time, and false often enough to make people feel genuinely hurt for no good reason. A parent who works long hours and comes home to a dog that runs straight past them doesn't need a slogan. They need to actually understand which of several independent systems is producing that behavior, because the answer changes what, if anything, they can do about it. That's the difference between a video that makes you feel something for 3 minutes and one that actually changes how you read your own living room for years afterward. But before we get to the forces, we have to deal with the myth that's currently sitting in the room with you, because if we don't kill it now, it'll quietly poison every fact I give you for the rest of this video. Here's the myth. If your dog has a favorite, it must be rationing its love, giving the chosen one the good stuff and everyone else the leftovers. That idea feels true because it's how a lot of human preference works. But dogs are not running a fixed pie of affection that shrinks the more people they share it with. A dog can be securely, genuinely attached to 3 different people in a house and still consistently run to one of them first. Those aren't contradictions. They're different questions. Does my dog trust and care about me? And who does my dog's nervous system treat as its primary anchor are not the same measurement, and conflating them is where most of the hurt feelings in this topic come from. Hold on to that. We're coming back to it at the end, with data behind it, not just reassurance. Part of why this myth spreads so easily is that most of the content built around it is designed to make you feel something in the first 15 seconds, not to explain anything. A video that says, "These are 15 things your dog only does for the person it loves like a mother," gives you a warm, specific feeling. But notice what it never does. It never tells you why the dog only does those things for one person. It never explains what's different about that person's presence, biology, or history with the dog. It just hands you a list and lets you assume the answer is simply more love, less love. That's not dishonest, exactly. It's just incomplete in a way that quietly does damage, because it leaves the other person in the house with nothing but a feeling of loss and no actual information. There's actually a useful parallel in human families, if you want a gut check for why this is plausible. Plenty of kids grow up with two loving, attentive parents, and still develop a slightly different relationship, with each one running to mom for one kind of comfort, dad for another. Without that meaning, they love either parent less. Nobody looks at that pattern and calls it favoritism in the cold, competitive sense. We recognize it as roles naturally sorting themselves out inside a relationship that has more than one adult in it. Dogs, it turns out, aren't doing something stranger than that. They're doing something remarkably similar, just without the language to explain it, which is exactly why it gets so easily misread as loving one person more. Okay, now let's build the 4 forces, one at a time, oldest to newest. The first force is timing, and it starts almost absurdly early, long before most people even bring a puppy home. Back in the 1950s and 60s, 2 researchers named John Paul Scott and John Fuller ran one of the largest behavioral studies ever done on dogs, 13 years, at the Jackson Laboratory in Maine, following litter after litter from birth into adulthood. What they mapped out became one of the foundational findings in all of canine science, a window, roughly from 3 weeks old to somewhere around 12 weeks old, where a puppy's brain is unusually primed to form its first real social attachments. Researchers today are careful about the word critical. It isn't a cliff edge where the door slams shut at exactly week 12. It's better described as a sensitive period, a stretch of time where social experience has an outsized, disproportionate effect on the bonds that follow, compared to the same experience happening later. Here's why that matters for the question we're actually asking. During that window, a puppy's nervous system is essentially laying down its first map of who is safe, who shows up, who handles me. Whoever is doing the feeding, whoever is doing the early handling and training, whoever's voice and smell are present the most during those specific weeks, has a disproportionate hand in shaping that first map. Not because they tried hardest, necessarily. Because they were there during the exact stretch of development when presence counts for the most. This is the part that stings a little if you adopted your dog as an adult, or if you weren't the primary caregiver during puppyhood. So let's be precise instead of dramatic. This window shapes the early map. It is not destiny, and it is not the only force in this video. You're about to see 3 more that operate on adult dogs, rescues, and dogs who've lived in a dozen different homes. But if you've ever wondered why the person who bottle-fed a rescue litter, or who did the 2 a.m. potty runs with a new puppy, seems to have a bond that looks a little different from everyone else who joined later, this is a real, measured piece of the answer. Early presence is not destiny, but it's not nothing. It's also worth being honest about what this window is not. It's not a stopwatch that starts counting the second a puppy is born and cannot be paused, and it's not proof that a dog who missed out on ideal socialization is somehow broken. Scott and Fuller's own long-running data showed enormous variation between individual puppies. Some formed attachments faster, some slower, and litters raised in less than ideal conditions still went on to form real, functional bonds with people later in life. What the sensitive period gives you is a slope, not a wall. Experience during those weeks counts for more, pound for pound, than the same experience 6 months later. That's a very different claim than the window closes and the door is locked forever, and it's an important distinction, because the forces coming up next explain exactly how a bond can still be built strong, later, from scratch. Here's the bridge to the next force, because timing alone can't be the whole answer. Plenty of people meet a dog well after puppyhood and still end up as its clear favorite. Something else has to be doing work on top of the early window, and it turns out that something else isn't really about affection either. It's about a specific job your dog's nervous system needs filled, and which job gets assigned to which person in the house. The second force isn't about the past. It's about what your dog's nervous system decides to do with a specific person. Right now, under pressure. And this is where it gets interesting, because the data says something a lot of people get wrong. In 2021, a team at the University of Veterinary Medicine in Vienna ran an experiment built around a simple question. Can a stranger do a dog's owner's job? They tested 48 adult dogs, half of them dogs who'd lived with the same family since puppyhood, half of them dogs adopted out of shelters in a task where the dog had to solve a small food puzzle. Sometimes the dog did it with its owner in the room, sometimes with a friendly stranger instead, either sitting quietly or actively encouraging the dog, sometimes completely alone. Here's the finding, and it's the one I want you to actually sit with. Strangers did not provide the confidence boost. It didn't matter if the stranger was warm, encouraging, sitting right there cheering the dog on. Dogs explored, played, and worked the puzzle significantly more with their owner in the room than with a stranger, even a friendly, engaged one. A stranger, in this very specific psychological sense, is just not the same category of person as the owner. And here's the twist that makes this relevant to your two-person household. The researchers found this held up even for the former shelter dogs, dogs who had already been abandoned once, and rebuilt an attachment with a brand new owner. Losing an old bond didn't damage their ability to build this secure base role with someone new. It just meant, once built, that role belonged to one person and could not simply be handed to whoever else happened to be standing there. So think about your own house. If there are two people in it, and your dog only fully relaxes, explores, and takes risks when one specific one of them is around, that's not your dog loving the other person less. It's your dog's nervous system having assigned the secure base role to a specific individual, the same way it would assign it to a parent versus a friendly neighbor. That role is not about total affection. It's about who the dog's stress system has filed under, safe enough to explore the world from. And this is also, by the way, why just spend more time with the dog doesn't automatically flip the switch. Time helps. But the role we just described isn't built by minutes logged. It's built by consistency in exactly the situations where the dog needed someone to lean on, which is a different thing than simply being in the room. Think about how this actually plays out in a normal week. A thunderstorm rolls in. A stranger knocks at the door. The vacuum cleaner comes out of the closet. In each of those small, ordinary moments of uncertainty, your dog's brain is running a fast, mostly unconscious lookup. Who do I check in with right now? Whoever wins that lookup, over and over, across dozens of tiny moments most people never even notice, is the one accumulating the secure base role. It's rarely one dramatic event. It's the accumulated weight of 100 small "who did I glance at when the doorbell rang" moments, each one so quick you'd miss it if you weren't looking for the pattern. That also means the role is visible if you know where to look. Next time something startles your dog, a delivery truck, a dropped pan, a firework in the distance, notice which person's name it would answer to first, whose lap it aims for, whose leg it presses against. That single behavior, repeated across enough small crises, is the secure base system revealing itself in real time. Now for the twist that actually explains something the first two forces can't. Why two dogs, raised by the exact same people, fed by the exact same hands, can still end up attaching differently. This is where we go from behavior into biology, specifically, into a single hormone system and the receptor that reads it. You've probably heard that oxytocin is the bonding hormone. It's the chemical that spikes when a mother holds her newborn, when a dog and owner make eye contact, when trust gets built. But having oxytocin float around your bloodstream means very little if your cells don't have the right doors for it to walk through. That's the job of the oxytocin receptor, and the gene that builds it, called OXTR, isn't identical in every dog. In 2014, researchers at Eötvös Loránd University in Budapest looked at this gene in over 200 dogs, 104 German Shepherds, and 103 Border Collies, and tested each dog's real social behavior, how they greeted a stranger, how they handled being separated from their owner, how they responded when someone approached them in a slightly threatening way. What they found was that small variations in the regulatory regions of that oxytocin receptor gene were associated with real differences in how strongly a dog sought closeness, both with strangers and with its own owner. In plain terms, two dogs can get the exact same dose of bonding hormone, released by the exact same interaction, and their bodies will use it differently, because the locks on the receiving end aren't built the same. That's not a metaphor. That's genetics. Which means some of what looks like, "my dog just loves this one person more," isn't a decision your dog is making at all. It's hardware. Here's why this actually matters for a 2 or 3 person household, and not just for scientists comparing breeds. If oxytocin release were the whole story, then whoever spent the most time petting, feeding, and playing with a dog should always come out on top, every time, with no exceptions. That's not what the data shows. It shows variation within dogs raised the same way, handled by the same people, fed on the same schedule. The same shared moment, everyone home for the evening, everyone offering affection can land differently in the same dog's body, depending on which receptor variant it happens to carry. So when a dog gravitates toward one person despite everyone in the house putting in comparable effort, this is one of the real, Biological reasons why, not a verdict on anyone's effort, and not proof that the dog just knows who's best. It's closer to what happens when two people take the exact same medication and get different results. Same input, different receptors, different output. Here's where it gets genuinely strange, and it's the newest, least known piece of this whole story. In 2018, a team working with researcher Josef Topal compared border collies and their owners across Austria and Hungary, 135 dog and human pairs, and they didn't just sequence the dog's OXTR gene. They sequenced the owners too. What they found was that the dog's attachment behavior, how anxious it got, how much it sought contact, how it handled a stranger, was tied not just to the dog's own gene variant, but to an interaction between the dog's oxytocin receptor gene and the owner's oxytocin receptor gene. Two separate biological fingerprints from two different species that are not related to each other by blood at all, meeting in the middle and producing a measurable effect on the bond between them. Sit with that for a second, because it quietly rewrites the whole question. It's not just which person did my dog choose. It's which person's biology happens to interact well with this specific dog's biology. A two-way fit running underneath the surface that neither party consciously controls. This is part of why the same rescue dog can settle instantly with one adopter and take months to warm up to an equally kind, equally patient one. It's not always about who tries harder. Sometimes it's a lock and a key that happen to fit. It also helps explain something a lot of multi-pet households notice but rarely have language for: why the same person can be the favorite to one dog in the house and clearly second choice to another, despite treating both animals with equal care. If attachment ran purely on effort, that pattern shouldn't exist. The person putting in equal work should get roughly equal results. But once you know that two separate genetic fingerprints are interacting to produce the outcome, the pattern stops being a mystery. Every dog-person pairing in a household is its own separate biological negotiation, running in parallel, and there's no reason to expect all of them to resolve the same way just because one person is doing the feeding for everybody. There's a fourth force, and it's the fastest, most automatic one of the four, because it doesn't even require the person to be in the room. Researchers at Emory University trained a group of dogs to lie perfectly still inside an MRI machine, fully awake, no sedation, so they could watch, in real time, what happens inside a dog's brain when it's given different scents to smell. Its own scent, a familiar dog, a strange human, and a familiar human. 12 dogs went through this. The scent that lit up the caudate, a brain region tied to anticipation and reward. The same region that activates when you expect something good is about to happen more than any other smell, including other dogs, was the scent of one specific, familiar human. And critically, that person wasn't even in the room. The dog's brain had already filed that particular scent under "something good is coming," purely from smell alone, with zero other cues. This is the layer under everything else. Long before your dog hears your key in the door, long before it sees your face, its nose has already run the calculation. A worn t-shirt, a pillow, the inside of a car, all of it is loaded with a chemical signature that your dog's brain has learned, specifically, to associate with safety and good things. And that association isn't generic to humans, or even to people I know. It's built, scent by scent, around specific individuals, which is exactly why a familiar smell from the wrong person doesn't produce the same effect as the scent of the one your dog has wired itself to. There's a reason this layer deserves its own force instead of getting folded into bonding in general. A dog's sense of smell isn't a weaker version of ours. Tuned up a little, it runs on a completely different scale, with a nasal structure and a dedicated scent processing organ that let it pull apart chemical signatures we can't consciously detect at all. That means the "who is this" calculation your dog's brain runs isn't a vague impression, the way a person might recognize someone's cologne from across a room. It's closer to a fingerprint match, run automatically, hundreds of times a day, on every person who walks near it. When that fingerprint hits familiar and safe, the reward circuitry answers before conscious recognition even has time to catch up. That's not affection being calculated. That's the fastest of the four forces, running underneath all the others. Now, put all four forces on the table at once, because the reframe is what happens when you stop looking at them one at a time. Nobody wins your dog's love through effort alone, and nobody loses it through a lack of trying. Your dog's favorite person is the output of a system, who is present in a developmental window that already closed, who occupies the role of secure base that literally cannot be shared or substituted, whose specific biology happens to pair well with this specific dog's receptor genetics, and whose particular scent has been chemically filed under "good things happen here." Layer those four, and you get something that looks, from a distance, like the favorite. Up close, it's an assembly, the mechanical result of timing, role, chemistry, and scent working together, mostly outside anyone's conscious control. And here's the part that should genuinely change how you feel about this, not just how you understand it. None of those four forces are exclusive. Your dog isn't running low on love for the people who didn't get picked. The secure-based research is explicit about this. A dog can be attached safely, measurably, meaningfully to more than one person in a house, the same way a toddler can love both parents and still reach for one specific one when they fall down and skin their knee. What gets assigned isn't how much love exists. It's, who does my nervous system reach for first when it matters? Those are different questions, and the dog answering the second one with your partner's name is not a verdict on how the first question would go. This also reframes something that trips a lot of people up. Why a dog can be visibly, obviously excited to see everyone in the house and still consistently orbit one person once the excitement settles. Greeting behavior and attachment behavior aren't the same measurement, and conflating them is exactly how the "he loves you more" story gets started at the front door every single day. The tail wagging, full-body greeting when you walk in is largely about social excitement and the release of built-up energy after separation. Nearly every dog does a version of that for nearly every person it recognizes and likes. The quieter thing that happens 20 minutes later, when the excitement has faded and the dog picks a lap to settle into or a person to shadow around the kitchen, is closer to what these four forces are actually describing. If you want to see the real signal instead of the noise, don't watch the door. Watch who the dog drifts toward once nothing exciting is happening at all. There's also a piece of good news buried in all this mechanism. None of it is fixed. The developmental window closes, yes, but the secure base role, we now know from the shelter dog data, can be built fresh, even in adult dogs who've already lost one attachment figure and had to start over. The scent association layer rebuilds itself every single day on nothing more than consistent presence and positive experience. You can't rewind the puppy stage. You can absolutely become the person, a rescue dog, a rehomed dog, or even a dog that's currently favoring someone else, chooses to run toward next. It's worth naming, too, why this four-force model matters more than it might seem at first. If my dog loves one person more, were simply true in the way most people assume, there would be nothing to do about it. You'd either be the winner or you wouldn't, and that would be the end of the story. But once you see it as four separate, partially independent systems, the picture changes completely. Miss the puppy window? Force 2, 3, and 4 are still fully in play. Your biology doesn't happen to pair perfectly with this particular dog's receptor genetics. Roles 1, 2, and 4 don't care about that at all, and they're still yours to build. A single cause story leaves you with nothing to do but accept it. A 4-force story leaves you with at least 3 levers you can still pull, starting today, regardless of how the 4th one landed. So let's make this useful, because if the favorite person system is built from 4 specific ingredients, you can actually work with each one. Before the specifics, one framing that'll make all 5 tips below land better. You're not trying to win your dog away from whoever currently holds the favorite role. You're trying to strengthen your own version of the same 4 systems, independently. Those 2 things sound similar, but they're not. One is a competition with a loser. The other is just you building a real, separate relationship on your own terms. If you have a puppy under 12 weeks old, this is the highest leverage window you'll ever get. Not because it's the only chance, but because effort here pays off disproportionately. Everyone in the house who wants a real bond with this dog should be doing hands-on care during this stretch. Feeding, gentle handling, short training sessions, calm exposure to new things. It doesn't need to be perfectly equal. It needs to be real and consistent, from more than just one person, if you want more than one person to end up mattering to this dog. Practically, that can look like rotating who fills the food bowl morning and night, taking turns on the first leash walks and vet visits, and making sure more than one voice is the one saying the puppy's name during those early weeks. None of this has to be scheduled like a chore chart. It just has to be real, hands-on, and repeated by more than one person. Because repetition during this window is doing double duty, it isn't just teaching the puppy commands, it's quietly writing the first draft of who counts as safe. The secure base research is your evidence here. The role can absolutely be built later. What builds it fastest isn't grand gestures, it's being reliably present in the specific moments the dog is uncertain. Novel places, unfamiliar noises, vet visits, meeting new people. Showing up calm and steady in exactly those moments teaches a dog's nervous system, one repetition at a time. This is a person I can explore the world from. That's the actual mechanism behind secure base, not affection volume, but reliability under mild stress. If you can, be the one who handles the genuinely uncomfortable moments, the nail trim, the thunderstorm, the first trip to a new vet's office, instead of quietly handing those off to someone else because they're unpleasant. Those are exactly the moments this system is built on. 100 easy, pleasant afternoons together will never carry the same weight as being the calm, steady presence during 10 hard ones. Since scent recognition runs on repeated personal exposure, you can lean into it deliberately. Be the one who handles feeding sometimes. Let a worn t-shirt end up near the dog's bed. Spend time close enough that your specific scent gets logged, again and again, next to calm, safe moments. This is slow and unglamorous, and it's also exactly how the caudate response layer gets built in the first place: repetition, not intensity. If you've done all the right things, fed, trained, shown up in the hard moments, and your dog still leans towards someone else in the house, the gene research gives you permission to let that go a little. Some of it really is a receptor lock and key that neither of you chose. That's not a verdict on your relationship with your dog. It's one variable among four, and it doesn't cancel out the other three. One more thing worth knowing. The favorite person role can shift across a dog's life, especially after a big change. Someone moves out, a new baby arrives, a family member starts handling most of the daily care. Because 3 of the 4 forces we covered are still active in adulthood, a dog that was never especially close to you can genuinely become closer over months of consistent presence, particularly if your role in its daily life changes. This isn't a fixed title stamped on day one. It's closer to a standing that has to be maintained. This is worth remembering, especially if life circumstances change your role in a dog's care. A new job with different hours, a health issue that means someone else takes over the walks, a new baby that shifts who's doing the morning routine. Owners often brace for a dog to forget them or shift allegiance instantly in these moments, and that's rarely how it actually plays out. The systems we've covered are built on repetition and consistency, not on a single dramatic event, so a temporary change in routine tends to nudge the balance gradually rather than flipping it overnight. Give any transition like this real time, usually measured in months, not days, before reading too much into where your dog's attention is landing. One honest caveat before we close. There's a difference between a dog that has a favorite person and settles fine without them, and a dog that cannot function, won't eat, paces, destroys things, panics the moment that one person is out of sight. That's no longer a favorite person story. That's a pattern worth mentioning to your veterinarian, because it can tip into separation-related distress that benefits from real support, not just more bonding time with the preferred person. There's a useful test for telling the two apart. A dog with a normal, healthy, favorite person preference will still eat, still nap, still go about its day when that person steps out. It just visibly brightens when they walk back in. A dog sliding into something more concerning shows real distress signals the moment that person is gone. Pacing, drooling, destructive chewing, aimed at doors or windows, vocalizing that doesn't stop. If what you're seeing looks like the second pattern rather than the first, that's the moment to loop in a vet or a qualified trainer. Not a moment to simply try harder to be enough for your dog. Preference is healthy. Dependency that breaks down the moment one person leaves the room is a different animal entirely, and it deserves a different response. Here's what I want you to actually take from this. If you're the person who watches your dog run to someone else first, you have not lost a competition. There was never a fixed amount of love being divided up in the first place. What your dog built, without meaning to, was a small system, timing, role, chemistry, scent, that happened to concentrate a few of its functions in one particular person. That's a story about biology and circumstance. It was never a referendum on whether you're loved. And if you're the person your dog runs to first, this is worth hearing too. That's not a trophy you get to keep without maintenance. The role you're holding was built out of consistency, not entitlement, out of being the calm hand during the thunderstorm, the familiar scent on the pillow, the one who showed up enough times in a row that a nervous system quietly decided you were safe. It can be built by someone else in this house, slowly, the same way you built it. That's not a threat. It's actually the most hopeful part of the whole video. This isn't a lottery you won once. It's a role that stays open to whoever keeps showing up. And the parts of that system that are still open, showing up in the hard moments, being the steady hand during a scary vet visit, letting your specific scent become part of this animal's sense of safety, those are still yours to build, starting today. Whether this dog is 8 weeks old or 8 years old, The window for one force closes. The other three stay open for as long as you two are together. If this changed how you think about your dog's favorite person, do me a favor. Tell me in the comments, are you the chosen one in your house? Or the other one, and which of these four forces do you think explains it? No wrong answer. I read everyone. If you want more of the actual mechanics behind your dog's mind instead of guesses dressed up as facts, subscribe, because that's the whole reason PetMindLabs exists. We turn real research into something you can see happening on your own living room floor. Next time, we're looking at whether your dog can actually tell when you're lying to it. I'm glad you're here. This is PetMindLabs. Stop guessing, start seeing.